and welcome to the UK Wildlife Podcast with me, Victoria Hillman.
And me, Neil Phillips.
Yes, we're back. We are still here, kind of, we think. Yeah, we're kind of reawakening the podcast now a little bit. We've both had a lot on, both personally and professionally, so unfortunately the podcast's taken a little bit of a backseat, hasn't it, Neil?
Yeah, but we're back. I know we said that last time, but we are this time.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have a load of material from Bird Fair, whatever happened. 1st of July, isn't it?
It is 1st of July, yeah.
Bird Fair's in almost exactly 2 weeks' time.
Just under 2 weeks.
So, shall we start with our wildlife sightings? And you can go first, Vic, because you actually have something that's not a red kite, don't you?
I do. I mean, I have seen red kites as well, but yeah, I've been out doing a couple of orchid and butterfly photo walks, and lots of orchids actually. We have seen a lot of bee orchids, greater butterfly, common spotted and pyramidal. Not so great for butterflies this year, but from what I'm seeing, it seems to be kind of a trend that most people are seeing. Like we were out on the Polden Hill somewhere that I would normally go regularly for butterflies, and we saw a handful of marbled whites and a handful of meadow browns and one large skipper. So numbers are really, really bad this year, and actually I haven't seen any butterflies or bees in my garden for the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is a little concerning because right at the beginning of like late winter, early springtime, kind of April time really, I had so many red mason bees and some other like little ruby-tailed wasps and stuff in the garden, and now just nothing. So I don't know what's going on. But yeah, so that's kind of my wildlife sightings. Not really seen much else other than the grass snakes have been around. I have seen a couple of them in the pond. They've now disappeared off in search of food, I think. And I think that's about it. So how about you, Neil?
Yeah, much the same with the butterflies and bees in my garden. I say my red mason bee colony was doing well, but normally I'm looking at wall-carder bees and things like that. And I've barely seen any of them, really. But I've seen 2. I've had 2 wall-carder bees. And normally I'm trying to photograph them, they're buzzing off before I can get them. And I've even put out some extra plants for them as well, and they're just not coming in. But on the upside, as I say, most people have been saying butterflies and bees are down, but dragonflies are having a pretty good year, and that's what's important. And, yeah, maybe not for our survival, but selfish point of view. And I've done quite well with them. I led a walk for Wildlife Trust and Greenlight Trust over on Canvey Wick, and despite it being windy and most of the ponds have dried up, we got southern migrant hawker and scarce emerald damselfly and a few nice bits and pieces. I've seen the spiny mason wasps in my local reserve, and I've been doing quite a bit of pond dipping. Some of you on social media will have noticed I've started a new YouTube channel, which did eat into a bit of the time of us of editing. Well, I haven't had a podcast to edit, have I, really? We haven't recorded anything, but that's what I've been spending a lot of time doing. And yeah, done pond dips on nice sites, found a couple of great diving beetle larvae that are 6 centimetres long, that's nearly as long as your index finger. Massive great things, and loads of other nice little bits. And I've sort of seen some lesser emperor dragonflies at Little Bell House Country Park. So, and I also popped to this place called the Somerset Levels that someone recommended, and saw like 10,000 4-spotted chaser dragonflies coming out the roost, which was absolutely brilliant. That was with Ben and Dan. Thanks for driving, by the way, Dan. And yeah, absolutely amazing. And I saw a Perez frog as well. But unfortunately, you couldn't make it, could you, Vic?
No, I was actually working. It was like the one day I had already committed to work, and I was absolutely gutted because I missed seeing you guys.
But we're definitely doing it next year, aren't we?
We are, yes.
And we're going to record a podcast in that morning as well, I think. Yeah, I think Ben and Dan were fishing to be on a podcast, so I think we might have to get them on at some point. So, yeah. But yeah, lots of bits. But like I say, the insect life is not as good as normal. It's a bit worrying out there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I went for a walk. So I did a 5K walk. I actually went down to the pharmacy and back. And the total sightings in that 5K walk, bearing in mind I was walking on the back lanes and stuff and along the river, I saw one male beautiful demonstration.
I mean, at least it shows the whole dragonfly.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy though. I would normally see so many butterflies and bees and everything else, and the way that I walked down there, it's past big lavender hedges and so many. Yeah, it's great to see so many gardens with so many pollinator-friendly plants and stuff out, but there's no life on them, which is really, really worrying.
It is not good. But we'll move on to some wildlife news. Continuing with the insect decline theme, the glowworm has declined so much it's been added to the ICUN, that's the international one, near threatened status, because the danger of its global extinction has increased. This is due to threats such as habitat destruction, pesticides, and of course, with glowworms, light pollution's an issue. They've been struggling in the UK for a long time. Numbers fell 75%. Oh, blimey.
Sorry.
I'm keeping that in. That was scarier than the decline. Numbers of glowworms have fallen 75% between 2001 and 2020. So, yeah, bad news for the famous glowing insect.
It's not good,
But
is it?
some good news. The wildcats that were bred in captivity and then released into the wild in the Cairngorms have now bred in the wild. So we have some wild kittens from captive bred wildcats. That's good news. The species is at high risk of extinction due to loss of habitat, outbreeding with feral and outdoor pet cats, and disease. And some estimates put it at less than 100 individuals in the wild. I think the more conservative estimates were about 400 or 500. Yeah, so it's great that this effort to boost the population does appear to be working. Leave it running.
I'm back.
Oh, yeah, I've got up to the cat. So if you want to do your news story now?
Yes. And we've got some other kind of good news story. Beavers have been confirmed living wild on another river catchment, and this time it's the River Stour in Dorset. So they are spreading, which I think is fantastic news.
Yeah, they think it could be natural, but I think people have other suspicions because their catchment does get quite close to one that's already beavers. So yeah, we'll see about that, I guess. And as another neat story from the RHS, that's the Royal Horticultural Society, who say people are embracing ponds. They've seen a 35 increase in the sale of pond plants since last year, and many of the exhibits at the Hampton Court Flower Show had ponds in too. So it's all good news. Because, of course, a pond is the best thing you can put in your garden for wildlife.
It is, because,
they're
I mean,
great
you
for
know,
everything.
with all the hot weather we had the other week, all the birds will come in, you know, the birds will drink from it, the insects can drink from it. It is one of the best things you can put in your garden. And it doesn't have to be a big one. It only has to be like a little diddy one.
Yep.
And
I've seen loads of people putting these mini ponds in now.
Yeah.
It's really good to see. And finally, you may have seen on the news that the media were absolutely outraged at the stop oil protesters chucking some orange pounder that you could easily wash off all over Stonehenge. And they were sort of demanding, why are they doing these extreme things? You know, I know they're trying to raise awareness for their cause. How dare they? This is ridiculous. Before literally a few days later, somewhere between 60 and 100,000 people marched in London on the Restore Nature Now march, and most of the news outlets completely ignored them. So that's why Just Stop Oil do stuff like that, I guess. Yeah, but hats off to all of you that attended that march. It did get on Sky News, and Channel 4 News did a big piece on it. So, you know, might have raised awareness a little bit, hopefully, among people that weren't aware of it. But there we go. So, shall we get on to the main topic of this episode, Vic?
I think we should. And I think it's something we've not actually... I think we've briefly touched on it, but we've not really done an episode on it, have we, Neil?
No, because we did quite a few photography episodes at the start, and then we thought, we want to be a wildlife episode. Let's not do too many photography ones. And other than having sort of wildlife cameramen as guests and stuff, we haven't actually touched on photography for about 3 years, which is a bit weird when, you know, us two's background. So we're going to talk about wildlife photography competitions and discuss whether they're actually worth entering and what the benefits are. And I should address right now that any listeners to the Bearded Tit podcast will be thinking, hold on, didn't Jack cover this in a podcast? And wait a minute, wasn't Neil on that podcast? And yes, we were. But so we might cover some of the same ground a bit, but my opinion has changed a little bit since then, I think it's fair to say. And we've got the benefit of having Vic here as well, who, of course, you've judged how many competitions now?
Oh, God, several. But yeah, quite a few. The international ones as well. So yeah, I can kind of give an opinion as somebody that's actually entered them and has had both positive and negative experiences, but also from a judge's point of view as well.
Yeah, so basically Jack should have got Vic on, not me, but never mind. What's one of the benefits, you reckon, Vic?
I know for some people, and it's if we just talk generally about photographic competitions rather than like the higher end or the lower end of like the levels, some people do actually find them really good for seeing how their own photography is progressing. I know I've spoken to quite a few people that say they do find it helps them just judge how their photography is progressing. They can be inspirational for people too as well. Like if they want to try something else, something new, maybe something a bit more arty, then you know they might be inspired by competitions. And you get to meet some great people. We met for the first time at an award ceremony, didn't we, Neil? I think we'd known each other beforehand, but first time we actually met in person was...
Yeah. So is that a negative, you meeting me?
It's a positive.
Yeah, well, this podcast wouldn't exist without photo competitions, probably, would it?
It wouldn't, to be fair.
So another negative.
And I think you just have to... There's always going to be positives and negatives with everything, but like one of the big positives for me is it wasn't actually a photo that was awarded in a competition. It was one that was... It was printed in the book, but it was picked up by someone else, and it kind of
Chris
went...
Packham. She's too embarrassed to say it was Chris Packham.
And it just went nuts, and that did actually quite literally change my photographic life, because from that I've ended up judging big competitions. I've done a lot more talks. It just really massively helped, I think, with kind of my as a wildlife and nature photographer. So it certainly can do that. I mean, I don't think it's that common anymore. I think it's something that used to happen a lot more maybe like years ago, but it can for sure.
Yeah, because your photos can end up being put on news websites. My ones are never the ones that get picked up. I might as well mention how I've done highly commended a few times in national competitions. I've won a county-wide one, and I think I got highly commended in an an invertebrate competition as well. So yeah, it probably hasn't hurt, and a lot of that was my pond creature stuff. So, but a bit like you, I suppose I've probably got it. It helped boost my morale, confidence, I suppose, with it all, because obviously doing pond creatures is a bit niche. But yeah, it helped with that. Although it did take a hit again when I got on a wall at one award, and I was up against some of the names like Alex Hyde and all that lot on the same wall there. It's just like, wow, these are photographers I've been looking up to for years. Although it did take a bit of a knock when someone took a picture saying what a wall and put it on Twitter, but they cropped only my photo out. And I did hear a certain well-known macro photographer mutter something about my picture not being proper photography or macro because it's in an aquarium. Less said about them, the better, which didn't, do much for my confidence, but it felt imposter syndrome, isn't it? They call it.
Yeah.
I suffered from that quite a bit. But overall, it was really good, and most people were very nice. And I think that was my first decent stack as well. So that's quite nice that got recognised. And that was done by sliding a beanbag across a table to photograph a dragonfly nymph's face. So, oops, I've probably just revealed what competition it is. People do investigating, but never mind. It wasn't the competition's fault. It was just other people. Yeah, that was quite nice. It was, and just meeting people. So I think I met Dan for the first time. I met Ben Andrews, who I just mentioned, went on the trip with recently. Ben Andrews, Daniel Trim, the dynamic duo, who both listen to this podcast. So hello, guys. Yeah, so I got to meet them. So that kind of negative column as well. No, who are top blokes. I met Alex as well. Alex, the worst thing about Alex, isn't it, is that not only is he like, I would put him at the top of British macro photography. It's always hard to pick who the best is, but if I had to pick someone, I'd put him up there. Sorry, Vic.
God, thanks, Neil. Jeez.
I know. And the worst thing about him of all is he's a really lovely man, so you can't even hate him. That's really annoying. He's a lovely man. So I got to meet Alex and other people, and you meet the judges as well, don't you? And sometimes they have a celebrity to hand out the prizes. Not that I ever won a prize, but you get to meet them. So it's Chris Packer one year, wasn't it? And I think Nick Baker's done it. And yeah, they've done a few over the years, haven't they? At various competitions to give them out. And we should have mentioned this is all like award ceremonies, isn't it? So they'll often have an exhibition and give the awards out. And yeah, people can go in and visit your photos. So my parents got to go and see my photos in print, which was quite nice. So that's a good pro, I think, for the competitions, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, if you do actually win something, sometimes you get money, which is always a plus, I think.
Oh, definitely at the moment.
Not that I've ever... Oh, no, actually, no, I have. I've won photography vouchers and stuff. Although sometimes, I will mention on the prizes, like if you win the video category, they'll give you an entry-level camcorder, or if you win the photography competition as a prize as an entry-level DSLR, and the odds that the person that wins competition doesn't already have a better camera is pretty slim. But, you can always sell the prizes, I suppose. And some competitions, they do give feedback, although I find that's getting rarer and rarer. I don't know about you.
I think, certainly with the bigger competitions, there's just no chance because of the number of entries they get. When you've got a competition that's getting thousands of entries, there is no way they can actually give feedback. I know there are a couple that you can kind of request feedback if you want to, or you certainly used to be able to, and you would pay like a little bit more on your entry fee and you would get feedback. The smaller ones, so like something like we should include camera club competitions here as well, really, not just talking about the big ones, but quite often with camera clubs, because I've judged a lot of camera club photographic competitions, I'm always asked to give feedback, but constructive feedback. And it's the one thing that I will always do. If somebody asks me for feedback, I will give them constructive feedback on the image that I'm seeing in front of me, regardless of whether it's something I'm used to photographing or not. I'm able to actually just look at it in a professional manner and go, well, okay, maybe trying this, that, or the other might help improve it, or, don't over-process this, different areas and stuff. But I've also heard some horror stories where, like, the judges on a personal level just not like the image and give them really negative feedback, and I don't think that's ever helpful. I would always give, constructive feedback and happy to discuss stuff with people. But I think if you want feedback, you have to be prepared that it might not be what you want to hear. I mean, it can be positive and negative, but if somebody says, well, it's just not in focus, it's not a criticism of anything other than the fact that maybe the photograph genuinely just isn't in focus. Sometimes with camera club competitions, you can only judge what is actually in front of you, especially with the print competitions, because they have to print them and mount them. And somebody pulled me up and said, well, you can't judge on the mounting. I was like, well, if they've cut half their subject off, I kind of can, because all I'm looking at is half a subject. So it's, pros and cons of getting the feedback. I think you have to definitely be prepared for both positive and negative. I mean, hopefully feedback you get from the higher end competitions, if you get it, is constructive, because I don't think giving anyone, if I call it nasty feedback or negative feedback, it's never going to help them, and actually it might put them off doing photography in the future or entering any more competitions.
Then the other thing to bear in mind with judges is if it's just a general photography judge, nature photography all different photography categories have different elements to consider. And if it's someone that usually judges portraits and landscapes or artistic stuff, still life things, they're not necessarily going to know what they're on about with wildlife and nature photography to some degree. I mean, I don't usually go to camera clubs with competitions, but I went to one and put in a back swimmer, a close-up of a water boatman's face. And he's like, oh, it's upside down. What is that? It's like, yeah, it lives upside down in the water. That's not upside down. That's how it's natural. It's like, oh, that's a 4. There's nothing going on with that picture. And it's like the most intricate, even just from the detail perspective, it should have been a 5 or 6. And a few of my friends in nature photographers just leant over and went, he knows what it's on about, but he doesn't know wildlife very much. And I remember years and years ago, I went to a nature photography club, and the person that run it was a very, very experienced judge. And he said, oh yeah, photography judges are fluent in, how do I put this politely? To paraphrase, ball poo. Some of them will just absolutely, just make up something and to make them say they know what they're talking about. Not say they all like that, of course, but, sometimes they have to say something and they can't give everyone a 10 and stuff like that. So, yeah, they don't understand the picture. So you could put in a picture of a red-footed falcon or something, and they wouldn't know what it is and would just go, oh, it's just a bird on a stick, which arguably, I suppose, from an artistic point of view, you could say they're correct. But yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? It can help you, but it can also knock your confidence as well if you think you've got a really nice shot and you get the wrong judge.
I think as a judge, you also have a responsibility to be constructive and not be negative or disparaging about something just because you don't understand the subject. So with one camera club I used to work quite closely with, and I would deliberately pick, they would give me the choice of what I wanted to pick to judge, and I would deliberately judge categories that are outside of my photographic comfort zone. So I've done sports, travel, food photography, and other stuff as well, because it helps me grow as a judge. And okay, maybe I don't understand the subject, but then I will be honest and say, okay, look, I don't entirely understand what's going on here, but from a technical point of view, maybe this could have been done or that could have been done. There's always ways to give criticism and be constructive and do it in a polite way, but unfortunately I think too often, and I do hear it a lot, that comments can be very disparaging because judges don't understand the subject. And as a judge, that is your responsibility to maybe do a bit of research and understand the subject, especially if you're judging something that is outside of your comfort zone.
And also, it's worth bearing in mind, my first ever national competition success was a photo that I put into a competition that the year before got nowhere, didn't even get shortlisted, and then the next year exactly the same competition got highly commended. So yeah, it shows how subjective it can be.
It can, and also judging panels change year on year. So you might see, okay, you put something in, you put photograph A into a competition one year, it doesn't get anywhere, leave it a few years or a couple of years, and then maybe try, if you feel it's good enough, try again when they have a different panel of judges, because a different panel of judges will probably make a different call because people will see things differently. And certainly with a lot of the bigger competitions, it is a panel discussion and it's a panel choice. It's not one person picking your image. It is a panel overall decision.
Yes, that's staying with judging. That's one of the negatives I do find with some competitions. One personal experience I had was it's like a one-off competition in Cornwall and Devon. Wildlife of Cornwall or Devon or something like that, and they wanted photos of Cornish West Country wildlife. So I put in 2 common dolphins sticking their heads out of the water next to each other, which wasn't perfectly exposed and everything, but look, it's not something you see every day, 2 dolphins with their head out of the water, and a chough feeding its young. I mean, you can't get much more Cornish than that. And they both got commended, but I lost out to the winning image, which was a kingfisher on a stick. Again, there's certain things like that. That doesn't tend to happen so much in the big competitions, but because a lot of the judges sometimes aren't photographers and they just pick something that looks pretty, I think. So you could get the best ever picture of a wood ant doing behaviour that's never been filmed or photographed before, and you'll lose out to the pretty rabbit or the field of bluebells or the kingfisher on a stick quite often, on especially if it's a calendar competition or something. But then you've got to, if it's a calendar competition, then you've got to gauge it that someone's got to look at it for a month, so they're going to pick it based on that.
I think it's probably a good time to actually talk about like the entering process, if that makes sense. And when I say that, I mean from somebody that's going to enter it, and I know we've talked about this a lot now, and I do discuss it a lot with camera clubs and groups and stuff that I speak to, that if you've decided you're going to enter competition X, Y, or Z, as the person entering, it is actually your responsibility to have a look to see, is the competition right for your image? Like Neil said, if you're entering a calendar competition, honestly, there's very little point in entering stuff like spiders or ants and stuff like that, because chances are it's not a photographer judging that competition. Chances are they're also not going to pick a spider to go in a calendar unless it's something like a invertebrate photographic competition, which is going to be a very niche group anyway. So it's kind of your responsibility as the person entering to make sure that your image fits that competition. Now, I've judged British Wildlife Photography Awards for a couple of years, and I mean the name alone gives it away. British wildlife. I'm not sure you could be any clearer, but in the rules it actually states must be British wildlife. So I'm not entirely sure at which point people thought entering photographs of tigers qualified as British wildlife, because there is a whole section on zoos and stuff, and we'll go into that later. But read what the competition is about, because you wouldn't put insects into Bird Photographer of the Year because it's a competition for birds. So of course your image isn't going to get anywhere. So you kind of have that responsibility to make sure that the competition you are going to enter, or the category you're going to enter, your images actually fit into that and would also work with it. Like we said, people aren't going to, okay, well, we would, but the majority of people will probably buy a calendar from a competition, like be it, county level or whatever, probably not going to want to look at a picture of a spider for an entire month in reality.
While we're talking about entering, we should probably talk about the rules and what you should watch out for with some competitions. So this is a possible negative. So some competitions out there, some of them seem to make a lot more money and, have less investment in the competition itself. But perhaps the one to look out for most of all is you have these rights grab competitions, you might call them, which is probably a bit of a harsh way of putting it for some of them, but probably quite accurate with others. And a lot of them are free to enter or low cost to enter, to sort of lure you in, have a nice prize. And then you look at the rights that are in the rules, and it says something along the lines of, you give us the rights to freely distribute and use your photo in relation to the competition, which is fine, put it in the book or whatever. And sometimes it has some very vague writing, like, or any use the company or organisation sees fit, which actually I think, Vic, correct me if I'm wrong, means they could possibly sell them even, I think, or sell products of them on, put them in their magazines. It depends.
You would actually you'd have to look at the exact wording, because I know something like Wildlife Photography of the Year, obviously by entering, you do allow them to then use your photos to sell prints of, or put them on notebooks, pencil cases, cushions, or whatever they put them on these days. And it will be in the rules, but something like Wildlife Photography of the Year will also be very clearly written in the rules that by you agreeing and entering your images, you are agreeing to allow them to do this. But it'll also say it's still within the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. So yes, they can sell prints, this, that and the other, but it's only in conjunction with Wildlife Photographer of the Year.
Because I've heard stories of people entering competitions and then their images being used in magazines and stuff without them realising and consenting, but they've signed away the rights. So just be careful on that one. It's a bit of a grey area in some ways of what they can do with some of these, finding what you've signed away. But
it is, and it's one thing that I will always say to people: read the rules carefully, because like if they don't set out clearly what you are essentially allowing them to do with your photograph, maybe don't enter. Because if they're being very, very vague about it, then maybe it's best not to risk it if you feel that strongly about it. I mean, some people probably don't actually care, and that's absolutely fine. But other people would be very, very disappointed to find that their photos being used in a way that they weren't aware it would or might be used in, but actually the reality is when they entered their photograph, that's what they agreed to.
Yeah.
And if you're in any doubt, email the competition and ask them outright for a clear explanation.
Yeah.
And if they don't get back to you, well, yeah, I wouldn't risk it.
Yeah.
Because it is, like, while we're talking about rules, I mean, this is the other thing. We said about reading the rules carefully for how your images might be used. But when you actually get to entering your images, read the rules very carefully about what is allowed, because some competitions don't allow captive animals. There are exceptions where it comes to like a story, or if you're like doing photojournalism and stuff like that, but you have to provide all of the information in that so that they can, you know, make a call, the judges can make a call through that. Also, like the size and quality of your images as well. You know, make sure that you are entering an image of adequate quality. And I say that mainly in terms of cropping. So, okay, with some of the cameras these days, maybe it's not such a big deal, but I have seen images disqualified at the final round of judging when they could have potentially won or been awarded in a category. But when it's come down to it and we've actually looked at it, they've cropped it in so tightly, it would barely print in a book, let alone as a big image in an exhibition, because they've cropped it so small, there just isn't enough detail in that. You know, a lot of competitions do have that written in their rules. You know, just be aware of how much you're cropping by. Like I said, with some of the newer cameras and that, maybe it's not such a big deal, but just be aware of that, because that is something where people have come a cropper. And also rules like what you can and can't do in terms of post-processing with images, because this is another area that crops up a lot when judging. And the reason you have to be really aware of it is because certainly for some of the top end competitions, if you get through the first round of judging and you're shortlisted, they will ask you for the original file or the raw file. And if you have been deemed to over process it in a way which is outside the rules, you can very well have your image disqualified at that point. So something like, a lot of the competitions say you are not allowed to add or remove subjects. And that doesn't include dust spots and watermarks. We've all been there where we've got dust spots and watermarks that we haven't realised at the time. It's not talking about those. It means you can't clone out bits of tree or add in another subject. And people, again, they've been disqualified for doing stuff like that. So it's other rules like that as well, just to keep a really close eye as to what you can and can't with post-processing.
And staying on with rules, I've had a couple of negative experiences with the rules, which has kind of put me off entering competitions a bit now. I think I mentioned this in the podcast with Jack, that he'd been told by a big competition, practically been invited to put in his aquarium images, because he takes pictures of pond knife and fish, obviously, in aquariums. And I had been told that it would, what's the words they use? It would be judged on an individual basis and stuff like that, whereas he'd been basically told to just enter what he wants. The next year I did pin them down, because I didn't want to spend the money entering and the time editing only to then get disqualified when they found out they were in an aquarium. I said to them, because I was surveying them and photographing them as well at the same time, that would be acceptable because it counts as conservation work. They said to make sure it's clear and stuff. So I think they said they think it'd be acceptable, but I risked it anyway, which I thought was a bit inconsistent. And I suppose might as well bring up the pro and amateur competition divide. So most competitions will accept, the big ones will accept entries from anyone, but you get amateur photography competitions. Now, of course, quite a lot of people that do photography, if they're any good, might have sold a print or two. So, are they a professional? And I think the definition, most of them, isn't it? Is it less than half your income, isn't it, Vic?
Something like that, yeah. It's like, if the majority of your income comes from photography, you are deemed to be a professional photographer. But it should clearly state it in the rules.
Yeah. Yeah, although it does get a bit vague, if you're a professional wedding photographer, does that still count and stuff? Again, worth an email to them. But there are a few competitions out there that have if you make any income, you count as professional. There's not many of those around, but I tried to enter one 3 or 4 years ago, and I thought, I'll clarify. Before I enter, I'll clarify. I told them I'd sold a couple of prints and done a couple of workshops, but it was nowhere near the income I got from my main job. And they said, oh, no, you've made some income, that doesn't count. But in the following years, I've seen a few people that earn more money than I do from photography and sell prints and all that kind of stuff. And let's just say at least one has come very high up in the competition and they've been allowed to enter. So, some of these competitions seem to have a very inconsistent judging of the rules as well, which, as you probably imagine, has put me off entering, to be honest. It gave me a more negative feeling than when I did the podcast with Jack, should say, along with a couple other things that have been going on.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, I think times are changing as well. There won't be as many people that have a full-time career as a professional wildlife photographer now. They will also have income coming from somewhere else, but there's also people that will have a part or full-time job, which is their main job, their career, and they do photography on the side, and maybe they sell a few prints here and there and that, but maybe they earn a little bit of money, but they wouldn't consider themselves to be professional photographers. There's kind of that little bit of a grey area there, but again, it should be in the rules, and if it's not, just ask them to clarify.
And people do get caught. Did that chap with the wolf jumping the fence a few years ago in Wildlife Photography of the Year, I think he won it, didn't he? Did he win the competition?
He did. It was actually a captive wolf.
People actually recognised the wolf, didn't they?
Yeah, and somebody actually said, like, you know, that if a wild wolf wouldn't jump over the fence, it would go under. So, like, when you've actually got people that understand animal behaviour on the judging panel, which I actually think is a really important thing to have, they don't have to be a specialist in any particular group, but if they can understand animal behaviour and that, they don't even have to be a photographer. You almost need some of these bigger wildlife competitions. I think you need to have those people on the panel, because then they can pick stuff out and say, it's not right, it wouldn't do that. But yeah, in the end, somebody actually recognised the wolf and the setup, and it was taken in a zoo in Spain. But yeah, it was a taxidermied one that fair play to them, they'd carried a taxidermied teeter out and put it on a termite mound.
Yeah, someone recognised the model, didn't like a...
It wasn't just that. I mean, somebody actually said, but it was a ridiculously long exposure to get the movement of the termites and everything. And they actually said, but there's absolutely no movement whatsoever in the ante. And even breathing it would have caused a little bit of blurring of the fur and stuff.
Wasn't it a dual exposure, though, or something? Because I remember seeing it myself. Because that's the exhibit we went round together, and we were looking at it going,
I think one of them was
out?
actually a long exposure as well. So it's, there was quite a few things picked up on that. But that, I mean, again, these have made it through and been awarded in, like, the best, like, the top of the top, Wildlife Photography of the Year. So mistakes happen. Those people have been suitably punished. That when you get found out from these things, I mean, you can try your luck if you want, but the consequences are you'd be banned for life from entering these competitions, and chances are other competitions will probably say, do you know what, we don't trust what they're doing is right, so you may end up just getting banned from other competitions as well. But at the same time, again, I do think these things can be avoided. I mean, I would hope that the people that organise Wildlife Photography of the Year certainly learnt from those experiences, and they have people on board now that can pick something up to say, do you know what, there's something not right with that. We have to investigate this further before we go ahead and award this image, because it's not right. And I think that's a big thing, but you can avoid these by having people on the judging panel to discuss ethics. And it was one of the reasons I think quite a lot of people were surprised when I joined the judging panel of Bird Photography of the Year, because, I'm clearly well known for my bird photography, aren't I, Neil?
Yep.
I'm very well known for my bird photography. But it's actually more
Sarcasm
about ethics.
Overload.
Yeah. Sarcasm alert. As a lot of you probably know, I'm very, very hot on my ethics when it comes to wildlife photography. And, you can pick stuff up if you know what you're looking for. And because I have written articles about the ethics of baiting and stuff like that, live baiting, dead baiting, there are ways to tell. And you can tell by behaviour. Has somebody got too close to an animal? Does it have a look of almost like fear rather than it being more natural? There are definitely ways to tell, and competitions can avoid hiccups by having specialists on the panel that are not necessarily looking at the quality of the images themselves, but actually looking at the compositions and the ethics of it to see if it's something that needs to be investigated further. So they're not necessarily judging the technicality or the visual appreciation of the image. They're looking more deeply into what's actually going on in the image.
Yeah, that does bring us nicely on to some of you will be aware of those awful images, stacks of frogs and frogs riding a snail, and they actually involve using glue and wires and stuff like that. And unbelievably, some photos that are quite obviously done by this have made it into some quite prestigious photography competitions, not necessarily natural history ones, but I think there's even one in the National Geographic, wasn't there, once?
There was one in National Geographic of a frog riding a beetle. These two species aren't actually naturally found next to each other or close to each other.
I think on different continents, weren't they?
Yeah, and they have actually used them. They held their hands up and said, look, we genuinely didn't know, and they then used them to talk about the ethics of photography, which I think, great. They've learned, but they're also using it now as an educational thing for other people. The Sony World Photography Award or whatever it was called. I don't even know if it exists anymore, but years ago there was also one that came up in that, and it's like, that is so wrong. We do see less and less of those types of images involving invertebrates, amphibians and reptiles now in the major competitions because people are on the lookout for them. They do have get picked up in magazine articles and online and stuff, but in the actual competitions we do see less of them. However, there is something that still goes on, and it is a grey area. I appreciate that. Some aspects of it are definitely not a grey area, but baiting of birds is a big thing. Live baiting or dead baiting of birds. And it can be a bit of a grey area. Now, if you are... Should we go back to our kingfishers again, Neil? That seem to pick stuff up a lot. So there is a lot of kingfisher photography out there that uses live bait. They're actually... The way they've done it is there is a tank under the water that has a fish in it, so the fish can't escape. It's got nowhere to go. It's got a finite amount of space, so it is live baited. The kingfisher can obviously go down and get the fish, but so you've got a couple of different things to look at ethics there. I'm not saying this happens all the time, and I know there are people that rightly or wrongly, whether you agree with it or not getting into that debate, they do it in a better way that it is much safer for the kingfishers because it has, proper soft bottom like the riverbed would have or whatever. But for people that don't really know what they're doing and they're doing it just to get images, it can be, very dangerous, almost deadly actually to the animals involved.
Well, certainly to the fish.
Yeah.
I remember me and Jack were talking about it years ago. And if you're a zoo or you have captive animals in the UK, I think it's under the zoo license, you're not allowed to feed live, I think it's vertebrates. I don't know if fish are covered. I know they're vertebrates. I don't know if it's like tetrapods or vertebrates. I think it's vertebrates. You're not allowed to feed live vertebrates to anything, if that's legal or not. I don't know, because it's wildlife, isn't it? And is the fish actually captive? And it gets into that whole thing of when I photograph my pond creatures, I don't count it as wildlife photography, but I don't count it as captive. It's more controlled, I suppose. But so that obviously there's the ethics of the animal there, but it's also the ethics of declaring, because obviously it's easier to photograph a diving beetle larva in an aquarium than in a pond. In fact, I would say it's nearly impossible in a pond, except in certain circumstances. I think you just got to be honest about how you took it, as well as the ethics of the animal too.
Yeah.
You literally are misleading people. Or you could use the word lying to people as well, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think the thing is, Neil, like you know what you're doing with them.
I've been doing it since I was 8.
Yeah, but there are, there's incidents where you've got, I think it's like snake eagles, and they actually, they nail snakes to the ground so they can't get away. And they're alive, they're not dead. I've also heard stories of areas where they will nail live, small rodents, like mice or whatever, to a tree to attract owls. And, these are hides that people will pay to go to take photographs that then they may or may not enter into competitions. So, it is a bit of a grey area. I think, generally speaking, it is getting better than it used to be. We're not there yet. I think there's still an awful lot that can be done. But as photographers, and I've had this discussion with both friends and, when I've given talks and stuff and I've been asked the question, you can also ask what the situation is. If you are going to go and photograph something from a hide, you can ask, is it a baited hide? How is it baited? Now, I have used baited hides for photographing vultures in Spain. It's not done all the time, and they're putting out bones. So they're not putting out, it's very much not live bait, and it's actually helping with conservation as well. So there are circumstances that you can, as a photographer, you can go and do stuff. You can be helping these animals and getting some really good photos at the same time. And you have that, if it's something that you feel strongly about, it's your responsibility to check that places aren't, that they're not doing it with anything else. They're just they find some roadkill and put it out, and maybe the birds come down and maybe they don't. But with some animals, there are actually, legal restrictions as to whether you can bait them or not.
So it's an absolute minefield, isn't it?
It really is. It really, really is.
And you can even have it going from the other way, where people get a bit ridiculous with it. How dare you go out into the habitat, or you photographed a kingfisher in the middle of the breeding season? That's absolutely ridiculous. It's like, yeah, I'm sitting in a hide that's used by hundreds of people every day. And so it can go either way with this sort of thing.
And we could probably talk about it for hours. But the other thing I would just say is just also check if you need a license to photograph animals, particularly in this country. There are animals you do need a license to photograph. So it's just worth checking as well, because some competitions will ask for evidence of that license.
Or in the case, say, it was a kingfisher at somewhere like Rye Meads or Raynham Marshes at the moment, where you sit in a public hide and you can see the nest hole. that's okay because you're not disturbing the bird. So
Yeah.
the schedule 1, isn't it, is in case you disturb it, not just to disturb it, I think.
Yeah.
So you need one then. But let's see, this is where it gets a bit complicated. But if you're going to a nest hole that is not on a well-used path, then you're going to be in a very dodgy territory, to put it mildly. We'll start wrapping up there. But Vic, if you were still actively taking photos, would you enter photography competitions at the moment?
Probably not. And some of that is, it's a bit of a hard one for me to answer, if I'm honest, Neil, because I'm not really actively taking photos. I do still take some as and when I am able to, which really isn't very often. And any photographic time I have now is really reserved for taking reference photos for my drawings. So it's quite hard for me to answer that. I mean, if I was going back and looking through my ridiculous Lightroom catalogue, which I'm pretty sure all of us have, that need sorting.
500,000 on mine.
Yeah, well, okay, I don't have that many, but I don't do photo stacking. So
that's stacks and time lapses for you, though. So
I think it would be a really hard one for me to call because I don't know that I would see any benefit right now for me. I don't think it wouldn't help me from a business perspective. So I don't know. I probably wouldn't. There's one thing we haven't touched on is actually the financial aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
Because the competitions, the top end competitions, you do have to pay to enter them. And
they're getting more expensive.
They are getting more expensive. And certainly for me, and this is one of the reasons I wouldn't enter, is I'm now having to change what I do in terms of work. So my focus is really all on my artwork, which means I don't have the money coming in that I did have when I was a full-time professional photographer. So I'd have to think very carefully, but to be honest, I probably wouldn't. But how about you, Neil? Because you are still actively taking photos and you're very much still a photographer.
Yeah, I mean, partly because I'm doing more video now, I think, but I don't even enter the video categories anymore. To my experience last year, that's basically put me off entering a competition I've entered many times and was easily my favourite competition. Basically, I paid my money to enter, then I couldn't find enough photos to enter, actually, but I spent hours going through, like I always do. I spent far too many hours, even though I've got all my best pictures highlighted, trying to decide which ones to enter, edit them. A lot of them were stacks, so I redid the stacks to make sure they were perfect, see if I get a better job out of it. And then I spent literally the whole weekend perfecting a video that I should have done earlier, but, going through and did a really nice documentary on a bee fly. I thought, well, at least I'll, because this competition in the past has done like a show reel of all the top videos. I thought, well, I might sneak onto that and it won't hurt, my exposure. And I think I entered 20, and I think I got about 10 or 11 shortlisted. I was like, wow. I was really, really happy about that. But then I tried to upload, you had to upload the high quality one, but 2 or 3 of them were stacks. And there was no way of me uploading the stacks. So this is about 2 weeks to go before you had to enter them. So I emailed the competition. I think I got an email back and they said, oh, try doing this, and it didn't work. And emailed them back. And in the end, I had to send them JPEGs of the raw files that I used to stack, which isn't what they want. And I emailed them saying, look, this is all I could do. I couldn't get hold of you. I still never heard back from them about it. And I've paid to enter this. Obviously not a massive amount of money, but still. So I think that's not really on. And I put the video in and they ended up putting, is it 3 or 4 of them in their book? And then very generously sent me a 10% discount to buy the book that they'd use my images in for free, for me paying them to use. I agreed to that in the terms, fair enough. But the book is now, that was, even with the discount, was still way more expensive than if I bought a copy when it was free when you got in the book. But the bit that really hacked me off was I spent all that time doing the video, which I really only entered to go and put the tank in the video category. And I'm told by the winner of the said competition, he was told less than 48 hours before the award ceremony, and by people that attended that award ceremony, that I was invited to, but of course had to pay to attend. They didn't even show the video at it. So, it's more the time I wasted than the money I wasted. That annoyed me. And that competition has already got new people running it from before. And yeah, that was my favourite competition to enter. And yeah, and combined with the other thing with, you're a pro, you can't enter, but this pro can win the competition in another one. It just kind of put me off, And some of the, again, Kingfishers and the Stick seem to feature highly in another competition. You just sort of I'm a bit jaded with it all, I guess the word is. Sort of it's the time I don't want to waste. See what I mean?
Well, that's it. And I think, you have to appreciate how much time it's going to cost you because, okay, you might have the image there, but it's not as simple as just throwing an image in a competition, uploading it to a database or whatever. It's not that simple because you have to write the caption as well. And, sometimes the caption can be the difference between, winning and not. So you have to think carefully about the captions and stuff. If you're doing stacking or videos, it's the amount of time you're going to spend, processing them and working on them. It's a lot of time and effort and money. And if you've got other things that in reality are probably more important for you to spend that time and money on, then it's just weighing it up, isn't it?
I've decided it's just not worth my time now. Which might sound a bit big-headed or arrogant, but it's just now I can get more exposure or appreciation or whatever it is, sticking stuff on YouTube and Twitter than I'll get from a competition. So
I think maybe as well there's a little bit of competition overload. Competition, I don't know, tiredness or something. There's just too many out there now. There's a lot of free ones, and I don't think you do get the exposure that you used to. Even in your very top end ones, you don't get the exposure that you used to.
And then weirdly, conversely, there's not quite the variety of judging because, was it 3 or 4 of the big ones in the UK now are all run by the same person with similar judges?
I will say all of the competitions that I've judged, I'm not talking about camera club ones now, I'm talking about like nature photographic competitions. All the ones I've judged, it's always been anonymously. So I've never known. I might have my suspicions because people have styles and maybe you've actually seen that photograph on social media already. So I might have my suspicions as to who took something. But, certainly all the ones I've done, they've always been done anonymously, and I've not known who's won or whatever until, until winners have been announced.
It's all very interesting, but I say, if it's probably worth it, and I don't mean this in any way derogatory way to people that do enter, it's probably worth entering for some people. It depends what you get out of it. I don't think the whole exposure thing is quite there anymore. There's some people that are really good photographers never enter competitions as well. They just don't think it's worth it. But other people get lots of stuff out of it, so it's it's going to be personal tastes and needs and opinions, I guess, at the end of the day. But for now, I'm having a break for a few years, put it that way.
It has to be your call whether you want to enter or not. You've got to weigh up the pros and cons for you and your photography and your time and your funds. And no one else can do that for you. I mean, like you said, Neil, you're going to be taking a break. Well, I'm now pretty much changing everything over to really concentrating on my art because, yes, I still do a little bit of photography, but ultimately it's not going to be my main work going forward now.
Well, I think that's a good spot to finish that long conversation. Lots for me to edit. But quickly before we go, should we talk bird fair quickly?
I will be back in the Puffin Marquee, stall P33. You cannot miss me because I'm right next to the mural, so please do come along and say hi. I've got a special thing going on with Egyptian vultures this year, so you can come and adopt your own little needle-felted Egyptian vulture with or without a keychain, and £5 from each adoption I will donate to the Creating Brighter Futures project, which is the one that Bird Fair is supporting this year. I am there purely with my art this year as well, so it's a chance for people to come and have a look at. I've got some original drawings that have been mounted and framed, and I've also got prints and some new animals and stuff, so please do come along and say hello. Hugs are always welcome, as is chocolate, so if you want to come along, say hello.
And we're both there I think every day we're interviewing someone on the podcast stage. I think the very final details are just being ironed out at the moment, so we'll have some more info on that. And yeah, I'll be just milling around. Generally, I'll be on Vic's stall every so often, and what we might do is put a time on Twitter that I might come to Vic's stall so you can come and annoy us both at the same time then. Yeah, I should be there all 3 days as well this year. I hope it doesn't rain because I'll be camping.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't rain as well.
And yeah, we hope to see you there.
Yeah, please do come and say hello. Like I said, you can't miss me because this year I'm right next to the mural. So there's no excuse not to come and say hello.
Other than that, thanks for listening. Do go and check out my new, on top of my UK Wildlife YouTube channel, I now have, it's called the Pond Lab channel. So if you like pond creatures, go ahead there now and go follow it because there's going to be some cool videos of me pond dipping some cool places. And I've already done a couple of videos on one on diving beach which has come out. So yeah, go check that out. But that's it from me.
Yep, same here. Yeah. No, not much. Well, yeah. I guess the news is that I'm stepping away from photography, really. That's the big news for me. Not totally, but it won't be my main thing anymore, sadly. Yeah. I guess I knew it was coming, but yeah, it's definitely happened. So there we go.
It's sucky. There we go.
Yeah, please do come support me in my new art venture. Would really appreciate it.
And we'll see you at Bird Fair or in the next episode.
All right, take care, everyone.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the UK Wildlife Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then please do subscribe and leave a review for us on Apple Podcast or whichever podcast service you use.
You can follow us on Twitter at UK Wildlife Pod, all one word.
Or on Instagram at UK Wildlife Podcast.
And like us on our Facebook page, UK Wildlife Podcast. And you can also post to the UK Wildlife Podcast community group.
If you would like to share your wildlife news or sightings with us on Instagram or Twitter, then please tag us in the post and use the hashtag UK Wildlife Podcast.
And you can now support us through our Buy Me a Coffee account, which you can find at buymeacoffee.com/UK Wildlife Pod, where you can give us a one-off bit of support or join our membership scheme. Head there to find out more. This episode was edited by Oscar Henderson. You can find him on Instagram at oscar.creates.